Before the first prayer was ever spoken by humankind, before the first tyrant declared himself immortal, before the first demon learned the sound of a mortal name, there were the Aeldari, not as they are now, grieving, scattered, haunted, but as they were in the beginning, radiant, endless, unafraid. To speak of them now is to speak of ruins. To speak of them then is to speak of perfection. The Aeldari did not crawl up from mud. They were not sculpted in panic or desperation. They were made with purpose, made to be beautiful, made to last forever. They were not born into a hostile universe. They were made to master it. And for a time, they did. The story begins in an age so old that even the oldest surviving Aeldari cannot remember it, only feel it, like phantom warmth on the skin, the last sunlight of a dead sun. In that age, the galaxy was not ruled by mankind. It was not ruled by the clumsy, brutal empires of now. It was a living garden of purpose and intention. At the heart of that order were the Old Ones, vast ancient beings of impossible knowledge, shapers of life, engineers of destiny. They did not simply explore the galaxy, they cultivated it. Worlds were not left to evolve in chaos. Species were not left to stumble in blind instinct. Life was a designed thing, a crafted instrument tuned and refined. The Old Ones made servants, allies, weapons, and then, in time, they made the Aeldari. Not slaves, not soldiers, heirs. They made them to be what would come after. The Aeldari were built with a grace that bordered on cruelty. Their minds burned brighter than human empires. Their hands shaped matter with the ease of thought. Their spirits resonated with the warp, not like a radio-catching signal, but like a musician stroking the strings of an instrument and drawing out song. Where humanity would one day fear the warp, the Aeldari were born inside it. They did not see the immaterium as horror. They saw it as color, sensation, reflection, a mirror of their own emotion. And their emotions were powerful: joy, desire, sorrow, grief. They didn't have feelings, they were feeling. To them, thought and sensation were the same act. To live was to create. To create was to feel was to shape reality. This was their birthright. This was the first light. They were not just intelligent, they were luminous. Each Aeldari soul burned in the warp like a candle flame wrapped in crystal, brighter, sharper, more beautiful than anything humanity would ever produce. Where a human's presence in the warp was a flicker, an Aeldari's was a blaze. To lesser species, they seemed like gods. And perhaps that's what they were. Not gods because they ruled, but gods because existence itself bent politely out of their way. They could heal where others withered. They could build where others struggled to stand. They could manipulate matter, sensation, and energy through art. Not through industry, through art. They sang cities into being. They dreamed structures into reality. They crafted weapons that were sympathetic extensions of their will. Graceful, living, responsive. Nothing was crude, nothing was wasteful, nothing was accidental. They built not because they needed shelter. They built because beauty demanded expression. They spread. It is said that the Aeldari Empire once filled the stars in a way mortals cannot even imagine. Not a patchwork of colonies, not a scattering of claims. They didn't hold territory, they were territory. Their presence poured through the galaxy like light through glass, reflected and refracted and folded back upon itself through shimmering corridors in reality called the Webway. But that is later. That is another chapter. In the beginning, the Aeldari did not travel by desperation. They moved the way a dancer moves through a room that is already theirs. They were young. They were infinite. They believed nothing could touch them. They believed nothing should. The Old Ones for a time watched them with what might have been pride, because the Aeldari were proof that a species could be made not only to survive, but to refine existence. They were art made flesh. They were intention made lasting. They were not brutal. They did not conquer in fire and steel. They did not grind civilizations down to rule. They did not enslave and devour and call it destiny. They thought that kind of hunger was embarrassing, a sign of something crude, something beneath them. The Aeldari perfected things. They tuned them. They guided systems instead of breaking them. That was how they saw themselves, not as conquerors, but as sculptors of reality. It is a beautiful self-image. It is also the first sin, because with perfection comes distance. With distance comes detachment. With detachment comes quiet cruelty. The Aeldari did not think of other species as enemies. They thought of them as material, flickers, shadows, short-lived curiosities in a galaxy that to them was home. It is easy to become arrogant when you have never been hurt. It is easy to become cold when you have never known loss. They had never been hungry. They had never been desperate. They had never been alone in the void, clinging to survival. They were gifted a universe already open to them. They were given the key to the warp and told it was safe. They had no fear, and a species without fear forgets caution. A species without caution forgets humility. A species without humility forgets consequence. If you ask an Aeldari now in this age, one of the survivors, one of the mourners, they will tell you something softly, voice trembling with a bitterness that has never healed. We were not destroyed because we were weak. We were destroyed because we were flawless. That is the core tragedy, not that they fell. But why they fell, all their sorrow, all their drifting craftworlds in the void, all their whispered rituals and desperate wardings and masks of control. All of it was born from a single truth. They were too perfect to notice they were dying. In the quiet of that first age, they saw the warp as silk. They thought it loved them. They thought it answered because they were worthy. They did not understand that the warp is not a mirror. It is a stomach. Everything poured into it is swallowed. Everything swallowed is digested. Emotion becomes hunger. Desire becomes appetite. Thought becomes entity. And no species in the galaxy had ever felt as intensely as the Aeldari. They poured love, pleasure, obsession, sensation, longing, hunger, ache into the warp like an endless river. They did not see what they were feeding. Not yet. Not then. Not while the first light still burned. For now, in this first moment of their story, they are only radiant. A people who do not age in the way mortals do. A people whose lives can stretch not across centuries, but across eras. A people who do not understand grief because in this time, they have not truly known it. A people who think the future belongs to them because the past already has. They are the Aeldari. The galaxy belongs to them. The warp sings for them. They have no fear. And somewhere very far away in a place that is not yet born, something in the dark smiles. They called themselves the Aeldari, but to the stars they needed no name. Their presence alone was enough. Their light filled the galaxy. 1,000 civilizations blooming like flowers under their distant watchful grace. No other race had ever risen so high. No other would ever fall so far. But for now, in this chapter of eternity, they are perfect. They are the children of the stars. Imagine a galaxy in harmony, not the silence of death, but a living, singing equilibrium. Every system humming with the order the Aeldari imposed upon it. Every world sculpted by patient hands, not torn apart by conquest. Every creature placed within its proper rhythm. To the Aeldari, chaos was vulgar. War was waste. Destruction was childish. They did not rule through force. They ruled through understanding. Theirs was not an empire of chains, but of design. Worlds became gardens. Moons became temples. Even the stars themselves were tuned to shine in patterns that pleased the Aeldari eye. They did not take joy in domination. They took joy in perfection. They built cities of glass and light, where towers curved like the limbs of dancers and bridges grew like living vines. Their architecture was not built, it was grown. Every spire, every arch, every whisper of stone was alive, symbiotic, resonating with those who walked within. They could feel the pulse of their own creations. They did not live inside cities, though they lived with them. And their art was not art. It was worship, not to gods, but to existence itself. Music could shape weather, sculptures could change color to reflect emotion. Poems could be felt, literally felt, by the listener vibrating across the skin like warmth. Every thought, every passion, every flicker of joy became part of their civilization's pulse. They were not a people. They were a symphony. To walk through an Aeldari world was to walk through consciousness. Mountains that hummed with unseen voices, oceans that rippled with light instead of reflection, skies threaded with silk clouds that bent and danced to match the emotion of those who gazed upon them. Their worlds were living dreams, each one unique, each one a note in the grand melody of their empire. And through it all, they believed they had conquered death. Because to them, death was an illusion, a thing that happened to lesser beings, those whose souls were too dim to survive the warp's embrace. But the Aeldari burned brightly enough that their souls lived on after the body faded. To die was to step through a door and emerge again in the shimmering immaterium, a place they thought was home. They did not fear the warp. They shaped it, sang to it, and let it sing back. They called it the Great Ocean, and it loved them, or so they thought. For ages they prospered. For ages they laughed. For ages they forgot what silence sounded like. They learned to fold the warp into their architecture, channeling psychic energy through crystal and thought. Cities thrummed with the resonance of living minds, a network of emotion and will, each soul a thread in a vast, unending tapestry. And above all others, the Aeldari prized experience, the sensation of being alive, the joy of creation, the whisper of eternity pressing against the soul. They were explorers of emotion, every delight, every pain, every beauty, every sorrow. They wanted to know it all, because knowledge was power and sensation was truth. They expanded endlessly, not for conquest, but for curiosity. Where other races fought wars over resources, the Aeldari shaped entire star systems simply to observe how light refracted between them. They harvested stars, bent reality, and turned worlds into living works of art. Planets became canvases, species became instruments, existence itself became sculpture, and the galaxy sang with them. For millennia, the Aeldari Empire thrived in balance, a golden age so long and bright that even the warp grew calm beneath its weight. It was as if reality itself held its breath to witness their glory. But perfection carries a whisper, a question that begins softly, innocently. If all things are possible, what is left to do? It was not a question asked aloud. It was felt like a dissonant note in a perfect chord. Because when every need is met, when every dream is realized, when every star bends to your will, what remains? The Aeldari did not yet know it, but the seed of their fall had already been planted. Some Aeldari began to wander, not in search of knowledge, but in search of something else, something missing, something they could not name. They sought new sensations, new emotions, new experiences to awaken the thrill they had lost. For a species that could feel the warp's currents in their blood, boredom was a kind of death. And boredom began to spread, slowly, quietly, like rot beneath painted wood. Those who still held to purpose, the artists, the philosophers, the dreamers, looked upon this creeping malaise with unease. But they could not stop it, because the Aeldari did not know how to stop anything. They only knew how to continue. They had forgotten the meaning of restraint. They had forgotten the value of stillness. Their civilization had no predators, no famine, no war, no challenge left to test them, so they turned inward. They began to test themselves instead. Pleasure, pain, perfection, depravity, creation, destruction. To them, all were the same, different colors on the same palette. And in the warp, the great ocean began to ripple, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a stirring, a whisper, a reaction to the flood of unchecked emotion pouring in from their minds. But for now, the Aeldari did not hear it. They danced on, beautiful and blind, the brightest stars in a galaxy that did not yet understand how dark the void could become. For every empire there is a moment, a heartbeat before the fall, when it shines its brightest, when the illusion of eternity feels real enough to believe. The Aeldari were in that heartbeat. Their laughter echoed through the stars. Their art reshaped worlds. Their souls burned like suns. They were the children of the stars. And soon they would learn what happens when stars die. There is movement, and then there is grace. Most species travel because they must. They build ships out of desperation, clawing their way through hostile void, wrapping themselves in screaming engines and crude armor, and throwing themselves across cold, black distance, hoping they live long enough to arrive. That was never the way of the Aeldari. They did not cross the galaxy. They stepped through it. They walked between breaths. They traveled the way a thought travels from memory to memory. They had the Webway. The Webway was not a highway, not a tunnel, not a machine. It was a world behind the world. Imagine a labyrinth that exists alongside reality, not fully in real space, not fully in the warp, but in a sealed in-between, a private dimension, a hidden arterial network threading through the galaxy like veins through flesh. The Aeldari did not discover it. They refined it. They shaped it. They made it theirs. They built glittering halls inside that secret layer of reality, sung and sculpted from wraithbone, psychic material that lived, listened, remembered. Their craftworlds, their courts, their temples, their marketplaces, their archives, their theaters, all of it could be connected without ever having to touch the cold, dangerous void outside. To lesser beings, distance is a cage. To the Aeldari, distance was optional. Within the Webway, the Aeldari could move between stars without risk. No warp storms, no demonic incursion, no translation shock, no navigator blindness, no praying that the madness didn't seep into the hull. They walked through reality as if strolling through their own home. Because to them, that's exactly what it was. The Webway was sanctuary. It was sovereignty. It was proof. Proof that the universe itself could be tamed. They built cities there, not outposts, not military bastions. Cities, places of art and movement and thought. Places where conversation flowed like light, where performances lasted for years, where emotion itself was sculpted and shared, where a single note of music could be tuned to make 1,000 listeners weep together. There are ruins of those cities still, sealed now, forbidden, haunted. In some forgotten corridors of the Webway, you can still find the remains. Balconies hanging over impossible voids, bridges of living crystal, archways with no shadow, the faint echoes of laughter that hasn't been heard in 10,000 years. And if you press your hand against those walls, if you are very still, you might feel that they are not entirely dead. Wraithbone remembers. It always remembers. In those days, the Aeldari did not fear isolation. Why would they? Any Aeldari anywhere in the Empire was only a step, a single step, from anywhere else. A single gesture, a ritual motion, a doorway whispered open, and distance became irrelevant. You could spend the morning on a world of crystal forests, walk through a gate, and spend the evening in a temple whose ceiling opened out into a violet aurora inside a sealed pocket of unreality. Star systems, to them, were just districts. Planets were neighborhoods. Galactic arms were suburbs. The galaxy was their city. That belief, that certainty, is important, because it is the exact shape of the thing they lost. Even their wars, when they bothered to wage them, were precise, almost gentle things. The Aeldari did not drag fleets through void space and smash them against enemy worlds. Why scar anything? Why waste anything? Why be ugly? War to the Aeldari was conducted like surgery, a scalpel applied in the right place at the right instant. A strike team, silent and elegant, slipping through the webway, appearing exactly where it must, severing the threat and vanishing without collateral. Others fought to survive. The Aeldari fought to preserve aesthetic. That is how high they were. That is how far they would fall. They did not think of themselves as conquerors. They thought of themselves as curators. They believed they were maintaining the correct shape of the galaxy. Correct skies, correct seasons, correct cultures allowed to bloom, correct cultures quietly removed. To them, this was not cruelty. It was gardening. If a species became too violent, too disruptive, too ugly, they would intervene, sometimes subtly, sometimes decisively. To keep the design intact. They told themselves this was wisdom. They did not hear the arrogance in it. They did not hear the word dominion hiding beneath the word care, and above all, above pride, above art, above reach, there was one belief that ran through all Aeldari existence. Nothing can touch us in our sanctum. That was the heart of their dream. Not that they could travel, that they could travel safely, that they were beyond consequence, that the warp, dangerous, raging, predatory for others could be avoided, not bargained with, not survived, avoided. They thought themselves immune. They thought themselves separate, untouchable, perfect. Alone in a clean, protected corridor of reality while the rest of existence clawed and bled outside. And slowly, quietly, this certainty became isolation. Isolation became indulgence. Indulgence became hunger. Hunger became sickness. Sickness became doom. Because here is the quiet truth. The Webway did more than keep danger out. It kept humility out. It sealed them away from struggle, from desperation, from consequence. You cannot learn limits in a world without limits. You cannot learn responsibility in a world without risk. You cannot learn restraint in a world where nothing can hurt you. The Webway was not just infrastructure, it was insulation. And insulation became decay. Even now, in the current age, long after their fall, the Webway still exists. Broken, torn, infested, there are sealed tunnels where no human has ever walked. There are abandoned halls where something else now waits in the dark. There are doors that lead to places that should no longer exist. The Aeldari still use those passages because they must. The Drukhari slip through them like knives in shadow. The Craftworlds send warriors down them like prayers made of wraithbone and rage. Even the Harlequins dance along those impossible roads as if they're walking the strings of a harp. But the Webway is not what it was. It is no longer sanctuary. It is a haunted vein, a wounded artery, a memory still trying to breathe. In the Golden Age, when the Webway was whole, when the Aeldari Empire moved as effortlessly as thought, they believed they had solved existence, they had removed danger, they had removed fear, they had removed effort. And in doing so, they had removed the last thing that tethered them to survival: struggle. There is a kind of death that begins long before the body ends, a stillness, a softness, a hunger for feeling that turns inward, spirals inward, tightens inward until it stops being hunger and becomes obsession. The Aeldari were approaching that point. They didn't see it. They couldn't. They were inside the dream. They were insulated by their own brilliance. And somewhere out in the immaterium, the warp shivered with anticipation. Because all that emotion, all that sensation, all that exquisite hunger, unchecked and unashamed, had to go somewhere. And it did. It went into the sea, into the warp, into the waiting dark, into something that had not yet been born, but soon would. The Aeldari did not fall in a single day. The end was not a scream, not at first. It was a sigh, a slow loosening, a softness entering the edges of their civilization like damp seeping into stone. Decay does not always begin with violence. Sometimes it begins with comfort. Sometimes it begins with having everything. The truth is simple and terrible. When there are no limits, nothing feels like enough. The Aeldari had cured hunger. They had ended war among themselves. They had lifted themselves beyond disease, beyond age, beyond fear of death. They had shaped worlds and tuned stars and hollowed out entire regions of reality to live in safety. So what else was there? What happens to a species that has already gotten everything it ever wanted and is still alive? That question was the first crack in paradise. At first it was harmless. Some circles of Aeldari began to explore sensation for its own sake. Art that could stun the mind, music that could make every nerve shudder. Shared emotional experiences so intense that whole gatherings wept as one in ecstatic exhaustion. There is nothing evil in longing. There is nothing cursed in wanting to feel. They told themselves this, and at first they were right. It began as pursuit, refinement, elegance. Why live dimly when you can burn brighter? Why feel a thought when you can inhabit it? Why taste joy when you can drown in it? But indulgence is a living thing. It evolves, it escalates. It always asks one more question. What comes next? What comes after ecstasy? What comes after rapture? What comes after perfection? When every feeling has been tasted, you begin to taste the edges. You begin to push. Not because you are wicked, because you are bored. And boredom, in a species as powerful, psychic, and emotionally intense as the Aeldari, is more dangerous than hatred. Hatred explodes, boredom corrodes, slow, quiet, certain. Their culture began to split. There were still those who lived in discipline, in philosophy and art that elevated instead of consumed. Those Aeldari looked at what their kin were beginning to become and felt unease. Something is wrong, they thought. This is not who we are. But then another voice answered, of course it is. It is exactly who you are. It is what happens when you remove consequence. As centuries slid into more centuries, and remember, the Aeldari lived for ages, carrying memory like a crown. The indulgence stopped being private. It became a movement. Pleasure cults formed. At first they were quiet, exclusive, gilded, intellectual circles, closed houses, private chambers in walled-off districts. Safe. But safe no longer meant moral. Safe no longer meant wise. Safe meant away from judgment, out of sight, unquestioned, and so the first true rot spread in secret rooms under tinted light to the soft hum of psychic music. These gatherings, at first they were about sensation, taste, touch, pain, release, emotion layered on emotion, fear wrapped in pleasure, pleasure wrapped in fear, intense, exclusive, refined. Then they became about domination, then about ownership, then about breaking limits, not just physical limits, limits of mind, limits of soul. They began to weaponize emotion itself. How much bliss can a mind hold before it shatters? How much terror can a soul experience and still remain whole? What happens to identity when you dissolve it willingly? They didn't just want to feel. They wanted to erase the border between self and sensation. And they could, because they were Aeldari. They had always been able to. And in the warp, something felt their experiments, something tasted it, something learned. Do not imagine gutter depravity, that's too easy. This was not squalor, this was not filth, this was ritual, this was devotion. Rooms perfumed with impossible scents, silks that responded to touch like living skin. Light sculpted into liquid forms that poured over the body and merged with the nervous system. psychic harmonics tuned to stimulate entire clusters of the soul. It was all so beautiful, that may be the worst part. Their doom was beautiful, the philosophers objected. There were warnings, gentle at first, then sharper. Some among the Aeldari high seers spoke in council. "This path is dangerous," they whispered. "We are folding in on ourselves. We are creating storms we cannot control. We are feeding the sea, the warp, with too much of us." Others laughed. The warnings sounded quaint, old-fashioned, afraid. Fear itself had become a lower emotion in Aeldari discourse, a thing lesser species felt. "We will never be touched by consequence," said the other side. "We have the Webway. We have control. We are safe." They believed it. They built palaces on that belief. They died for that belief. As the cults grew, moderation died. What used to be rare became nightly. What used to be nightly became constant. Emotion, raw, unfiltered, unbounded, poured into reality. And what pours out of a soul does not vanish. It leaves a mark, it leaves a pressure, it leaves a wake. For humanity, a single psyker screaming in fear can warp reality. For the Aeldari, imagine billions of souls, each a bonfire, each burning in synchronized ecstasy and torment for centuries. All that psychic output had to go somewhere, and it did. It bled into the warp, it pooled, it thickened, it fermented. The immaterium began to swell in answer. It began to lean closer, to listen, to hunger. Outside, in the physical galaxy, the signs were subtle. Aeldari society still gleamed on the surface. Their cities still arched like dreams. Their world songs still rose and fell in perfect resonance. The Webway still thrummed with safe passage. To an outsider, nothing had changed. But inside, something was wrong with the silence. The quiet places had vanished. There was no stillness anymore, no humility, no pause, no breath. You could feel it in the way conversation sounded, always laughing, always seeking, always performing, even in private. You could feel it in the way eyes lingered too long, in the way touch became claim, in the way dialogue became manipulation, testing, tasting. You could feel it in the way their dreams trembled. Because their dreams were no longer theirs alone, something was dreaming with them. Not all Aeldari surrendered to this. Some recoiled, some fled. Some in quiet terror retreated to great vessels, vast world ships, self-sustaining and alone, to leave the empire behind before it fully rotted. Those vessels would one day be called Craftworlds. At this point in the story, they were not holy, they were not warrior shrines, they were not disciplined arcs of ritual and austerity. They were escape plans, the first lifeboats. Built by those who saw the sickness and said, "We cannot turn this back. We must leave." They left. They were mocked for leaving. They were called fearful, prudish, cowardly, dramatic. In time, those who mocked them would die screaming, their souls ripped from them in one impossible instant. In time, those who fled would be called survivors. In time, they would be called saviors. But not yet. Not yet. For now, the rot spreads. For now, the empire continues to dance. For now, the galaxy looks on in awe, and the Aeldari look inward in hunger. And in the warp, deep beneath thought, a shape is forming, a presence, a sleeping godling of need, fed by symphony, fed by ecstasy, fed by cruelty, fed by perfection turning on itself. The Aeldari do not know its name yet, but soon they will. And when they hear it for the first time, it will already have devoured them. In the end, it was not war that killed them. It was desire. Not hunger like an animal's. Not desperation like the hunger of an empire on the edge. Number. Aeldari desire was something far more dangerous, infinite, precise, and patient. A desire that could afford to take its time. A desire that could afford to become art. And eventually, ritual, and eventually faith. What began as pleasure had become refinement. What began as refinement had become obsession. What began as obsession had become doctrine. The temples of sensation were no longer hidden. They were not fringe. They were not shunned. They were celebrated. In some systems, they were now the center of culture. You did not join them because you were lost. You joined them because you were worthy, because you had evolved beyond restraint, because you had the courage to feel without fear. The language turned itself inside out. Restraint became cowardice, discipline became repression, caution became weakness, and surrender, total surrender, honor became enlightenment. In those palaces of excess, something new began to bloom, not just physical sensation, not just shared psychic feedback loops of pleasure, terror, despair, and ecstasy layered together. Number. Something deeper. Possession. The Aeldari learned to open themselves and let their souls be touched. Not consumed, not erased, not yet. They called it communion. They called it union. They invited emotion itself to enter them and reshape them, to be flooded by terror so perfect that the self cracks like thin glass, to be filled with desire so complete that nothing else in existence matters, to be wrapped in worship so intense that identity becomes optional. They erased the line between feeling and being, and each time they crossed that line, something in the warp watched, and learned, and waited. It is important to understand this. The Aeldari did not think they were creating a god. They did not believe in gods in the way mortals do now. Their gods, the old Aeldari gods, were beings of myth and legend, yes, but also of story and symbol and psychic truth. Kyla Mensha Kine, the bloody-handed war god, Asurian, the first light, Isha, the mother, the healer. These were not gods like a human city priest would mean the word. These were ancestral cosmic archetypes, truths made into form. But this new thing was not one of them. This thing was not ancestor, not protector, not symbol. This thing was born from them, from the living Aeldari in the present moment. And it was built not on hope. It was built on appetite. Imagine this, billions of souls, each brighter and sharper than any human psyker's flame, pouring waves of raw sensation and self-erasure into the warp without pause for centuries. No guilt, no restraint, no fear, only more and more and more. All of that psychic runoff doesn't dissolve. It coagulates, it thickens, it becomes shape, and in that shape it begins to want. A simple want at first, a child's want. More, more, more. That was the first heartbeat of she who thirsts, the nameless godling, the sleeping hunger, the shape in the deep that had not yet opened its eyes. Not yet. Not yet. But the moment it was possible, the moment it began to form, the doom of the Aeldari was already guaranteed. Because now, their fall was not just likely, it was growing. The cults, of course, did not see horror in any of this. They saw transcendence. They saw proximity to something so vast and exquisite that their minds strained to hold it. They began to seek not only pleasure but purity of experience. Not many feelings, one feeling utterly perfected. Rage distilled so perfectly that it becomes beauty. Agony distilled so completely that it becomes worship. Lust made so pure it feels like light. They began to martyr themselves to single notes of sensation. Some would be immolated in shared psychic rapture, evaporating into the warp in a scream that was not pain, at least not pain that would admit to being pain. They did this willingly, proudly, as offering. They thought they were ascending. In truth, they were feeding. Others watched in horror. Not all Aeldari had surrendered themselves to this spiral. Some were afraid, truly afraid for the first time in their long lives. Fear among the Aeldari is not like human fear. When a human fears, it is sudden, a spike in the dark, a hunted reflex. When an Aeldari fears, it is deep. Their souls are so bright in the warp that fear echoes, it lingers, it stains. Those who still had restraint began to look into the immaterium, and they did not like what stared back. They felt pressure, like the air before a storm, like tension just before a string snaps. Something is coming, the seers whispered. Something is building, the old mystics warned. We are not alone in the sea anymore. The Webway can't hide us from this. This is not an invader. This is us. They tried to warn the others. They said, we are feeding something vast. They said, we must stop. They said, we are calling a thing into being that we cannot kill. The answer they got from the throats of those already far gone was simple and cold, and in its way perfectly honest. So what? For those lost to the spiral, the risks were irrelevant. What is annihilation to a people who already believe themselves immortal? What is death to a species who has never been afraid of it? What is consequence to a civilization that has not felt it in millennia? The very idea of too far had become alien. In their minds, there was no too far. There was only not far enough. One step remained, one last boundary, one final act of surrender. The cults longed for it the way the dying long for water. They could feel it in their bones, something waiting at the edge, something like a mouth, something like a lover, something like an answer. And then something new happened in their rituals. Very small at first, hardly notable, but it mattered. One day in a palace of living silk and bone light, a high celebrant slipped into trance before her court, surrounded by motion, music, worship, flesh, the air so saturated with psychic heat it almost rang, and she stopped breathing. Not because she was dying, because something else was breathing through her. Those who watched did not panic. They watched in reverence, as her eyes opened, and they were no longer her eyes. Something looked out through her, not an old god, not a demon of rage or decay, something new, something impossibly young and impossibly vast, something that regarded its worshippers with the unblinking curiosity of a newborn predator. You could hear the entire hall go still. All that sound, all that ritual moaning, all that layered sensation, gone. Silence, perfect electric silence, and then it smiled, not with the mouth, with the soul, and every Aeldari present wept, not in fear, in awe, in adoration, in need. That was the first true communion with Slaanesh. They didn't have the name yet, but the god did. In that moment, that single instant of contact, the Aeldari race crossed the event horizon of its own extinction. There was no going back. It was done, not physically, not politically, spiritually. Because from then on, the most powerful, most influential, most decadent of the Aeldari did not believe they were risking doom. They believed they had touched divinity. And who stops worship when the god finally answers? And the warp swelled, and the pressure mounted, and the song of their civilization, once elegant, thoughtful, slow, became a scream. Not a scream of terror, a scream of want. That scream would not stop. That scream would build and build and build until reality itself split. And when it split, it would not just kill a world. It would erase an age. It would erase an empire. It would erase a people. It would give birth to a god. And the galaxy would never sleep again. It did not happen in a year. It did not happen in a day. It happened in a single breath, an inhalation across the span of the galaxy. An exhalation that killed a civilization older than human myth. The fall of the Aeldari was not a war. It was a birth, theirs, Omer, and hers. By this point, their empire was hollow and shining. Their ships still glided through the Webway like liquid light. Their palaces still glowed with soft colors and living stone. Their voices still filled the air with perfect harmony. Their dancers still moved like starlight given form. But beneath that beauty, reality had swollen to the breaking point. There were entire sectors given over to ecstasy. Continents where sensation cults ruled openly. where shrines pulsed with psychic heat like the cores of stars, where the boundaries between self and desire had melted to liquid. There were cities that never slept, cities where screams and music were the same sound, cities where the walls themselves vibrated in sympathy with the emotional fever of their inhabitants. The Aeldari called it transcendence, the warp called it fuel, and the thing waiting in that warp, the not-yet god, called it food. For a long time, this thing had been forming, gathering, gestating, fed by lust without end, fed by obsession without limit, fed by cruelty without remorse. Every act of domination, every ritual of shared excess, every violation of restraint, every moment where pleasure and suffering were treated as tools instead of truths. All of it went into the sea. All of it was given shape. All of it turned into a single terrible infant will. And then, one moment somewhere, untraceable even now, it was enough. Something opened its eyes. Reality tore, not in the way mortals think of tearing. No physical rift, no lightning crack across the sky. This was deeper. This was existential. Across the heart of the Aeldari Empire, souls began to die, not bodies. Souls, in an instant, without warning, without mercy, trillions. Imagine a star imploding. Now imagine that star was made of minds, of memories, of songs, of joy and hunger and art and grief. Now imagine that implosion echoing through the warp with the force of a newborn god's first scream. That was the fall. The Aeldari did not have time to fight. There was no enemy fleet in orbit, no invasion, no siege, no call to arms. There was only pressure. A psychic tidal wave radiating outward from the Aeldari core worlds, a shockwave made of raw, devouring want. It hit them at the level of spirit and tore them open. On 1,000 pleasure worlds, bodies hit the ground mid-ecstasy and never moved again. Eyes wide, mouths still parted in joy. Souls sucked out of them like breath off a mirror. In their palaces of perfection, high celebrants froze like statues, their flesh still warm, their thoughts still mid-prayer, and then collapsed into cold, empty shells as their immortal essence was swallowed whole. There were no last words. There was no warning. When she arrived, they existed, and then they didn't. Far away in the wilder edges, in the ark ships that had fled long ago, in the exiled enclaves of those who had said no while saying no was still allowed. The survivors felt it like an impact to the skull. Some went blind from the psychic flash. Some dropped to their knees and vomited up black ichor. Some clawed at their own faces, screaming without sound as the pressure of the newborn god's consciousness blasted through the warp like a sun detonating inside the mind. The Aeldari are a psychic species. That is their glory. That is their curse. When she was born, they all felt her. All of them, everywhere, at once. It is said, in whispers, reverently, fearfully, that in that instant every single Aeldari soul cried out. Not help, not mercy, her name, because she already had one, because she was born knowing it, because she was born from them, and so she already owned them. Slaanesh, she who thirsts, the prince of excess, the devourer of Aeldari souls, the last god the Aeldari would ever create, and the god that would end them. Her birth sounded like music. That is an obscenity, and also the truth. For those who survived the shock, for those whose souls were not devoured outright, there was still the echo, a resonance. Some describe it as the most beautiful thing ever heard, a perfect note that ran through flesh, bone, memory, and spirit and made everything else meaningless by comparison. A perfection so complete it erased guilt, a pleasure so absolute it erased self. To feel it once was to know that you would crawl through fire for it again. To feel it once was to belong to it forever. This is what the Aeldari had made. This is what they had wanted without saying they wanted it. This is what answered. Where Slaaneish's awareness touched real space, reality tore open like wet silk. The screaming soul death of the Aeldari didn't just feed her. It opened something. In the heart of their empire, an impossible wound erupted in the galaxy. A hole in real space, a churning, shrieking, howling vortex where physics surrendered and demons poured through like blood from a severed artery. This wound would never close. It is still open. Even now, you know it by another name, the Eye of Terror. That is what killed their empire forever. Not a war, a hole. A hole they themselves tore in existence because their god had to be born somewhere. Her birth crib was reality itself. Planets died, not in fire, in grief. Imagine a world in perfect harmony, sky tuned to mood, oceans alive with psychic resonance, cities grown in graceful arcs of living crystal. Now imagine that world having its soul ripped out in a single instant. Not the people, the world, the Gestalt spirit, the culture, the identity, the song that made it what it was. When that dies, what's left is only geography. After the fall, there were entire Aeldari cradle worlds, left silent and intact. Buildings untouched, art still glowing, gardens still in bloom, but no voices, no souls. No one left to remember why any of it mattered. Museums with no historians, theaters with no audience, temples with no gods. That is what the fall left behind. Beautiful corpses, an empire of immaculate tombs. Their gods died too, the old ones, not the new one. In that single instant of collapse, the ancient Aeldari deities, the mythic shapes that had walked beside their people since before memory, were hunted. Some were shattered outright, their essences torn apart and swallowed. Some were chained, some screamed for mercy and were given none. Only fragments endured, splitting, scattering, hiding. The war god Cain, the bloody-handed one, was broken into shards of rage and cast into the material universe in pieces. Pieces that would later awaken inside ritual armor, calling themselves Phoenix Lords, wearing warlike memory. But that is later. For now, even their gods bled. Their pantheon died screaming at the feet of their own child. There is no cruelty in the galaxy like that moment. There never will be again. And then, after the scream, after the soul death, after the birth, there was silence, not peace, absence. The great Aeldari core, the heart of their civilization, their oldest worlds, their deepest palaces of sensation and worship, was gone. Not conquered, not occupied, gone. Annihilated in spirit, hollowed out, left behind like a skull picked clean. The survivors, scattered, exiled, already running, looked back and did not see home. They saw a hole in the galaxy where their people used to be. And in that hole, the Eye of Terror boiled and laughed. Understand this, and you understand the Aeldari forever. They did not just lose a war. They lost themselves. They lost their certainty, their arrogance, their purpose, their safety, their gods, their immortality, their right to believe tomorrow belonged to them. They went from eternal to endangered in one heartbeat. From we cannot be touched to we are hunted at the soul. From we shape the warp to the warp wants to eat us. They became prey, spirit prey, food, and they have never stopped running. Not in 10,000 years, not in any direction that matters. Silence, that was the first horror. Not fire, not screaming. Silence. Across the void in ships that had fled long before the fall, on hidden worlds at the edge of the galaxy. In quiet exile enclaves that had once been mocked as paranoid, joyless, afraid. The survivors woke to a universe without a voice. They reached out with their souls, instinct, reflex, habit, the way Aeldari always had, expecting to feel their people in the warp. And there was nothing, no chorus, no pulse, no background hum of a billion living minds. For the first time in their history, the Aeldari were alone. It didn't feel like distance. It felt like amputation. Something that had always been there, something so fundamental to being alive that none of them had ever named it, was simply gone. Imagine waking and realizing you cannot hear your own heartbeat. That is what they felt. That is what the fall took. On the vessels that would become known as Craftworlds, some Aeldari threw themselves into ritual trance, desperately calling for lovers, siblings, children. Some of them heard a reply, a whisper, half a word, a fading echo, and then mid-syllable, silence again. You cannot grieve properly when you feel the exact instant a soul ceases to exist. It is not like a body dying. It is like a song being cut in half. No closure, only subtraction, only absence, only the knowing that they were, and now they are not, and there is no path between those two states. Just a cliff, just an edge, just the drop. Many of the survivors broke, not physically. Some simply went still and never spoke again. Their eyes remained open. Their bodies moved, slowly, automatically. They ate when fed. They breathed, but they were not present. There was nothing left to anchor to. Imagine being tuned to sing with a choir for thousands of years and then finding out there is no longer a choir. Not they left. There is no choir. There is only you. You are the last note. You are the last instrument. Your voice, alone in an empty hall. For a species that had built identity not just on the self, but on shared psychic resonance. Solitude was agony. Others did not break inward. They broke outward. There were those who, consumed by despair, reached for the warp in blind grief. They begged for answers, for mercy, for reunion. They did not find their lost kin. They found her, Slaanesh, she who thirsts. The newborn god, still blazing with the raw psychic meat of their fallen empire, answered some of them. Not with comfort, with hunger. Their souls were pulled apart like silk, slowly, delicately, reverently. Some Aeldari in that moment smiled. They thought, in that first confused instant of contact, that they were being allowed to rejoin the ones they had lost. They thought it was mercy. They didn't understand until too late that they were not rejoining anything. They were being eaten. This was the second horror of the New Age. Survival was no longer natural. It was maintenance. It was work. Their souls, once radiant, beautiful, rich, had become a curse. To exist as Aeldari was now to be hunted, not by blades, not by guns, by appetite, by a cosmic predator born from their own perfection. Now, simply being, simply breathing, simply existing as what they are, draws the attention of she who thirsts. And if she tastes you, she will follow. And if she follows, she will take you, not your body, you, your you-ness, your memory, your heart, your fire, you forever gone. That is the horror of being Aeldari now, not death, consumption. The survivors began to understand this very quickly. The Craftworld seers felt Slaanesh-like pressure on the other side of a locked door. Always there, always waiting, always patient. The moment your spirit weakens, the moment you die, the moment you slip, she takes you. And there is no afterlife, no peace, no reunion, no rebirth, only her, forever. That was the third horror. There is no heaven for the Aeldari anymore, only a throat. Across the scattered survivors, denial died fast. Panic turned to discipline, grief turned to ritual. What had been culture became doctrine. What had been preference became law. What had been lifestyle became survival strategy. Entire societies rewrote themselves in days. Imagine that. Imagine your entire civilization changing its soul in days. That is how fast the fall broke them. That is how hard it hit. On the great exiled vessels, those world ships adrift between the stars that had fled before the fall, out of fear or wisdom or prophecy, a new way of living began. Those vessels would come to be called Craftworlds. At first, this was just a practical term. They were worlds that had been crafted. But over time, it became something deeper. A craft world was no longer just a ship. It was a womb, and a tomb, and a fortress against despair. It was a promise to the dead. This will not happen to us again. We will not become what destroyed us. We will not feed her willingly. We will not go quietly into that mouth. We will become hard. We will become disciplined. We will become cold if we must. Better cold than consumed. Better strict than damned. Better controlled than lost. The Aeldari who fled to these craft worlds swore oaths, not to power, not to conquest, not to beauty. To survival. Survival became holy. Restraint became sacred. Emotion, once a playground, once a canvas, once a communion, became something that must be contained, trained, channeled. Because unrestrained desire had birthed their executioner, and they would not feed her again. This is the birth of something new, the path. But that comes soon. For now, understand this. The Aeldari who survived chose to live under chains of their own forging. They would never again trust themselves without those chains. That is how deep their shame runs. That is how much they fear what they were. There was a final horror, one more cruelty in the wake of the fall. They discovered that she, Slaanesh, could still reach for them while they lived. Not fully, not easily, but in dreams, in moments of weakness, in indulgence. If they slipped, even a little, if they surrendered to ecstasy or rage or obsession, their spirits flared in the warp, and she turned her head, and she smiled, and they felt it, the attention, the focus, the reaching hand, the quiet, endless whisper, "You are mine already. Come home." The Aeldari will do almost anything not to feel that touch, almost anything. So the survivors became something the galaxy had never seen before, an ancient dying people who are terrified of themselves. Not of outsiders, not of invasion, of themselves, of what they might become if they let go. They walk now with caution that looks like elegance. They speak with calm that looks like superiority. They live in ritual that looks like arrogance. But inside, it is not arrogance. It is terror. It is control. It is survival. In 10,000 years of darkness since that day, the Aeldari have been called many things. Arrogant, cruel, cold, distant, obsessed with their own tragedy. And that's not entirely wrong. But beneath all of that, here is the truth. They are a species living in mourning, mourning their past, mourning their gods, mourning their immortality, mourning the sound of their own psychic choir, mourning the future they will never have, and mourning the fact that death itself is no longer rest. Every day is survival, every breath is defiance, every dream is dangerous, every birth is a gamble, every funeral is a prayer that the soul was not taken. And every moment of beauty, and yes, they still have beauty, is haunted by the knowledge that this is all that remains. The echo, the shard, the broken piece that refused to go silent, the shattered soul. They were never meant to be salvation. That is important. The craft worlds were not built as arcs in the beginning. They were not designed as the last hope of a dying people. They were built as projects, wandering cultural vessels, mobile artisan citadels, slow-moving sanctuaries for philosophy and art. Great ships that drifted far from the Aeldari core to trade, to think, to experiment with quiet ways of living away from the indulgent heart of the Empire. When the Aeldari were still immortal, still arrogant, still certain, the craft worlds were considered quaint, provincial, ascetic, almost embarrassing. Retreaters, they were called, those who fear beauty. Entire social circles in the late Empire laughed at them. Some even pitied them. How small to choose distance. How boring to choose discipline. How cowardly to choose restraint. But when the scream came, when Slaanesh was born, When the Aeldari Empire turned to ash in a single instant, those cowards were the ones who survived. And their ships, their quiet wandering experiments, became the last beating hearts of a murdered civilization. A craft world is not a ship the way humans think of ships. A craft world is a world that moves, vast beyond imagining, layered with ecosystems, spined with wraithbone, that psychoactive living material that the Aeldari weave with thought and will. Wraithbone is more than structure. It carries song, it holds memory, it resonates with the mind that shaped it. The ship listens, the ship feels, the ship learns. Each craft world is partially alive, bonded to its people, reflexively protective of them. In time, each will develop its own mood, its own personality, its own way of remembering. Some are quiet and mournful, some are harsh and militant, some are deeply spiritual, some are bitter. They are not interchangeable. They are not copies. They are survivors with identities, like ghosts that learn to carry cities. In the first days after the fall, panic ruled even these safe havens. There were too many questions and no time to grieve. Are we being followed? Will she find us? Will the warp tear this refuge open too? Is there any point in continuing to exist? And quietly, the question that hurt most: what are we now if we are not what we were? Because the Aeldari had always defined themselves by what they could do. Now they were being forced to define themselves by what they must not do. That is a cruel reversal. To go from limitless to restricted, from indulgent to restrained, from eternal to endangered. It is like waking up in a smaller body. It is like being told you can never breathe deeply again because something in the dark will smell it. The answer they found was doctrine. The craft worlds became temples of discipline, not the kind of discipline that obeys out of fear of punishment, but the kind of discipline you cling to because if you let go, you fall forever. They could not go back. They could not resurrect what was gone. They could not undo the birth of she who thirsts. But they could refuse to feed her. That became holy, that became everything. And from that need, from that vow, came the structure that defines Craftworld Aeldari survival in the ages since. The path. Before the fall, the Aeldari lived without limits. They did what they wished, followed whim, impulse, desire. That was their pride. That was their doom. After the fall, there would be no more drifting lives, no more I will be whatever I feel like being today. Number. Now each Aeldari would commit to a path, a strict way of being, a role, a focus, a single defined expression of the self. Not forever, but for now, fully, completely. You do not dabble on a path, you disappear into it, you become it, you are it. Because the goal is not pleasure anymore, the goal is containment. The path protects in two ways. First, control. The path narrows the mind, not in the sense of stupidity, in the sense of refusing chaos. It says choose oneself and be it completely and deny every other self. Choose one purpose and live inside it so your soul does not sprawl, does not wander, does not become appetizing again. Aeldari who follow the path bind themselves to ritual, clarity, order. They take their emotion, burning, catastrophic, too bright emotion, and they pour it into one channel, one role, so it doesn't spill everywhere, so it doesn't call to her. Second, replacement. The path gives them something to live for. Without the path, they would simply grieve, they would drift, they would spiral. The path says, number. You will not drift. You will walk. You will walk this line. You will walk it with all your being. You will make meaning where meaning was cut away. You will continue. In this way, the path is both weapon and therapy. Religion and restraint. Culture and cage. There are many paths. You will see some of them later in their most extreme forms. The path of the seer. Those who walk the mind's edge and stare into the future so that their people may live one more day. The path of the artisan, those who create, pouring emotion into craft instead of into self-destruction. the path of the poet, the path of the bone singer, the path of the spirit seer. But above all, there is one cluster of paths that shape the survival of every craft world, the path of the warrior. We'll return to that in full when we speak of the Phoenix Lords. For now, understand this. War, for the Aeldari of the craft worlds, is no longer pride. It is medicine. Sometimes it is the only way to bleed safely. Because here is the other truth of the craft worlds. They are not just fleeing. They are hunted, always. The galaxy after the fall is not kind. Humanity is rising, primitive still, brutal, hungry. Orcs are everywhere, eternal and laughing in the face of extinction. Chaos spills through the scars in reality. And beyond that, there is the new horror. Demons, warp predators, lesser entities, newborn hungers, all birthed in the turbulence of Slaanesh's arrival. The craft worlds cannot simply hide and drift forever. They have to fight. They hate that they have to fight. But they must. And so, to survive war without losing themselves to rage, obsession, or ecstasy, the Aeldari built a ritualized, perfected structure. The aspect paths of war. That is coming, that is important, that is how their warriors live with themselves. But it is also later in the telling. For now, the craft world is still forming its shape. Let's look at one more truth. The craft world is not just a military and not just a culture. It is also a grave. Because of Slaanesh, even death is dangerous. When a human dies, the soul goes somewhere. When a demon dies, it doesn't truly die at all. When a space marine dies, his gene memory lingers in his chapter. When an Aeldari dies, Slaanesh reaches for them always. So the craft worlds had to invent a way to keep their dead safe. That duty would become one of the most sacred practices of their entire existence. In time, they would create the Spirit Stone, a gem, a vessel, a psychic anchor. When an Aeldari dies, their soul is drawn into the stone instead of being devoured. The Spirit Stone is then brought back to the craft world and placed within its psychic matrix. The Infinity Circuit, a soul stream woven through wraithbone and memory. In this way, their dead are not lost. They remain, they advise, they warn, they guard. They become part of the craft world itself. Imagine walking through the corridors of your home and knowing your ancestors line the walls, not as ghosts, but as presence, as warmth, as awareness. The craft world is alive with them. It is a community of the living and the dead. It is an ark of souls. It is a defiance against she who thirsts. And it is the only reason the Aeldari still exist. Over time, each craft world became different. Some turned inward, embracing ritual, austerity, meditation, prophecy. Some hardened, becoming blades in the void, teaching themselves to strike, to vanish, to survive at any cost. Some wandered so far they vanished into legend, becoming myths even to their own kin. Some fell. Some were found. Some were eaten from the inside by demons, some burned. Survival is not guaranteed. Even now, there are so few craft worlds left that every single one of them matters. When one is lost, an entire civilization's worth of memory dies with it. An entire voice in the choir goes silent. And remember, the choir is already almost gone. Here is how you should see the craft worlds, not as fleets, as lanterns. Lanterns drifting through a night that wants to swallow them. Lanterns carrying the last light of a people that once believed the galaxy existed to adore them. Lanterns filled with discipline, memory, grief, and stubborn grace. They are not what the Aeldari once were. They are what the Aeldari chose to become after they saw what they really were. Not arrogance, not decadence, not perfection, survival, cold, exquisite, relentless survival. The craft worlds are not the Aeldari's pride. The craft worlds are the Aeldari's apology and their promise. We will never become that again. We will live. We will control ourselves. We will not feed her even now. 10,000 years after the fall, they are still keeping that promise, barely. While some fled the stars, others fled downward, into shadow, into denial, into the Webway itself. When the Empire began to crack, when the first whispers of restraint and fear reached the great pleasure cults, many Aeldari laughed. They didn't believe the end was coming. They didn't want to believe it. And so they did what Aeldari always did best. They found a way to avoid consequence. They said, "If the gods are coming, we will hide from the gods. If the warp hungers, we will live where the warp cannot reach. If the universe is collapsing, we will build a new one beneath it." So they sealed their doors, descended into the tunnels of the Webway, and built a sanctuary of their own design. A city without day, a city without restraint, a city without end. They called it Kamarag. Others call it the Dark City. To understand Kamarag, you must understand the Aeldari talent for beauty. Even when they are monstrous, they create art. The Dark City is not chaos, it is precision. Every spire is deliberate, every street curves like a blade, every shadow is placed exactly where it will cut deepest. It is a labyrinth of light and cruelty. Imagine a metropolis carved into the bones of an endless cavern, lit not by stars but by the glow of suffering made into architecture. Bridges hang over abysses that hum with psychic energy. Temples rise from rivers of light and bone. The air is thick with the scent of narcotic rain, and laughter, high, cruel, musical laughter, echoes from unseen balconies. Kamarag is not a ruin of the old empire. It is the old empire, preserved, intensified, stripped of all illusion. The Aeldari who fled there refused to change. They did not flee Slaanesh. They denied her, and so they survived, but at a cost that makes death look merciful. When she was born, her scream reached even into the hidden Webway. It killed millions there too, the shockwave tearing through reality's seams, slicing through their underground palaces, snuffing out souls mid-laughter. But the core of the city endured. Wraithbone buckled but did not shatter. The psychic pressure bled through cracks in the Webway walls, but Kamarag held. And those who remained, those who woke in the aftermath, knew immediately that they had escaped the full hunger. They had not escaped the taste. She still wanted them. They could feel her eyes on their souls. They could feel her pulling. And so they began the only kind of worship that could keep them alive. They fed her, indirectly. Understand this horror. The Dark City lives by murder. Every breath, every luxury, every pleasure they take comes from the suffering of others. Because in Kamarag, pain is currency. They discovered something terrible and perfect. If they could inflict enough agony on others, real, screaming, living agony, they could sustain themselves. They could fill their spiritual hollowness with the psychic residue of torment. They could stop feeling her teeth for a little while longer. They could cheat Slaanesh. They became predators not just for pleasure but for survival. Every scream they caused was a heartbeat stolen from her mouth. Every victim prolonged their existence. They became parasites of agony. They became the Drukhari. Do not mistake them for the Craftworld Aeldari. They are not fallen versions of their cousins. They are the mirror opposite. The Craftworlds live by control. The Drukhari live by release. The Craftworlds deny desire. The Drukhari embrace it until it becomes disease. The Craftworlds are quiet. The Drukhari are never silent. They fill every second with sensation, because silence means thinking, and thinking means remembering, and remembering means fear. They live as if the fall never happened, as if denial can rewrite history. They are the embodiment of everything the Aeldari were before the scream, and they are proud of it. They call the Craftworlds cowards. They call restraint a lie. They call discipline a form of death. They say, at least we are alive, and maybe in their own way they are right. Kamarag is vast. It is not one city but many layered realities folded over each other within the Webway's depths. Each realm has its own ruler, its own factions, its own economy of cruelty. The Kabbalite archons rule most of them, immortal tyrants, nobles of a broken species, who command armies of warriors addicted to blood and spectacle. They are elegant monsters, each smiling through 1,000 betrayals, each terrified of the day they feel her touch again. They host wars for amusement. They duel for territory, for slaves, for the right to feel anything at all. Their cruelty is mathematical. Their palaces are museums of pain. Then there are the witch cults, the gladiators of Kamara. They turn combat into worship. They fight not for survival, but for rapture. They dance with blades across arenas that span miles, their movements choreographed like art, their deaths performed before screaming crowds. Every wound inflicted, every drop of blood spilled releases psychic energy into the air, energy that the Drukhari drink in like breath. They feed on the agony of others, and for a brief, intoxicating moment, they feel whole again. They call it the kiss of survival. Deeper still are the homunculi covens, the surgeons of damnation. They are the oldest, strangest, most terrifying of the Drukhari, masters of fleshcraft, artists of anatomy, priests of transformation. They have learned how to take pain apart and put it back together. They can rebuild a body from screams. They can harvest a soul from a memory. They can make death optional, suffering infinite, and existence flexible. To be captured by a homunculus is not to die. It is to become raw material. Their laboratories are cathedrals of living horror, and yet in Kamarag they are revered, because the homunculi can make you live again, if you serve them, if you pay them, if you let them rebuild you in their image. They are the reason the Drukhari do not fear death as much as they should. They always think they can come back. In this way, Kamarag sustains itself, by predation, by pain, by endless hunger and performance. It is a world that should have burned 10,000 years ago, and yet it thrives. Because the Drukhari are too afraid to stop. Every act of cruelty is another day without being devoured. Every atrocity is another breath stolen from the jaws of their god. They have become perpetual motion made of horror. And in their hearts, somewhere deep beneath the laughter and the lust and the screaming joy, they know exactly what they are. They are not free of Slaanesh. They are her shadow, her reflection, her addiction made flesh. They are the proof that she will never stop feeding. Because as long as they live, they feed her, even when they think they're escaping. That is their irony, that is their doom. To walk through Kamarag is to see the Aeldari as they were meant to die. To stand on a balcony and look down is to see the fall replayed endlessly. The lights never go out, the music never stops, the screams never fade. It is beautiful in the most terrible way imaginable. A civilization that refused to change, kept alive through the ritual of self-inflicted damnation. They are the eternal night of their species. They are the laughter at the funeral. They are what remains when denial becomes an ecosystem. They are the dark city, and they will never see the dawn. There are some Aeldari who could not live in chains, not even ones of their own making. The Craftworlds offered structure. Kamarag offered denial. But not all souls can survive inside a wall, no matter how necessary that wall might be. Some Aeldari heard the call of the stars and could not resist it. Some looked upon their cousins, the cold ascetics of the Craftworlds, the laughing predators of the Dark City, and saw nothing they could love. Some simply could not bear the silence of the Infinity Circuit, the hum of 1,000 dead voices pressed into Wraithbone, and so they left. They stepped into the void. They became the Outcasts. Among humans, outcast is a punishment. Among the Aeldari, it is a sentence one writes for oneself. They do not leave in anger, they leave in sorrow. They leave because they cannot breathe inside what remains. Some seek solitude, some seek freedom, some seek redemption, some seek death. The galaxy is large, and the Aeldari walk it quietly. They are ghosts in living bodies. The most common among them are the Rangers. You can think of them as hunters, scouts, drifters. They walk the void, travel the wild edges of the galaxy, keeping watch over old places where their kind once lived. They are the eyes of the dying race. They wander between Craftworlds, sometimes bringing warnings, sometimes carrying messages between kin who no longer trust one another. But most of the time, they are simply alone. They live by discipline, but not by doctrine. They hold to the path, but at arm's length. They wear their sorrow like a cloak. They are not hated by their Craftworld kin. They are pitied. Every soul who walks the path too long knows that the call of the stars may take them one day too. Some who leave never return. Some who return never truly come back. Because once you've lived in silence for centuries, how can you hear the choir again? There are also the Corsairs, rogues, pirates, nomads, not evil, at least not always, but dangerous. The Corsairs live between the Craftworlds and Kamara, taking what they need, trading, raiding, laughing in the face of extinction. They have not forgotten joy, but their joy is desperate. It's the kind that burns fast because it knows how short it lasts. They fly patchwork fleets built from Aeldari design and scavenged human wrecks. They paint their ships in colors that blind scanners, that confuse targeting arrays. They hunt slavers and sometimes are slavers. They fight demons and raiders alike, and sometimes they are indistinguishable from both. They are chaos but not chaos, freedom but never peace. They remind the galaxy that the Aeldari are not gone, and that sometimes survival looks like rebellion. And then there are the Exodites, the farmers of the stars, the quiet ones. They left long before the fall, long before Slaanesh opened her eyes. Even then, there were Aeldari who saw where their empire was going. They looked upon the spires and the pleasure cults and the cities that sang of themselves, and they said, "Oh no, this cannot last. We will make our own way." So they left the core worlds and settled on distant, wild planets, worlds the rest of their kin considered primitive. They lived close to the soil, under alien suns, without the hum of the Webway beneath their feet. They grew crops. They raised herds. They fought the beasts of the land and sky. They became simple, but do not mistake simplicity for weakness. The Exodites remember the old ways. They remember what the Aeldari once were before indulgence, before empire. They live with the land, not above it. They bind their souls to the rhythm of their worlds. They raise world spirits, vast psychic entities formed from the minds of generations, echoes of what the Aeldari used to call gods. When one of them dies, their spirit joins the planet itself, the soil, the wind, the rivers. Their world remembers them. The Exodites are what the Aeldari could have been if they had learned humility before they learned despair. Together, the Outcasts form a kind of invisible nation. No banners, no borders, no leader. Just fragments of a people scattered through time and space, each living in the way that lets them breathe another day. The Craftworld Aeldari call them the lost kin. The Drukhari call them the fading ones. Humans rarely see them at all, but sometimes when a war rages across a forgotten system, when a human colony falls silent, when a demon world suddenly burns with wraithfire for no reason anyone can name, it is because an outcast was there. Sometimes one Aeldari with purpose is enough to change a planet's fate. There is something haunting about the way they move through the galaxy. They do not rush, they do not shout, they do not preach. They move like memories. They appear where they are needed and vanish when they are done. Sometimes they save, sometimes they kill, sometimes they simply watch. They are not heroes. They are not villains. They are what happens when a people refuses extinction but cannot go home. To be an outcast is to live without the path, and that is both freedom and danger. Because without the path, you can begin to feel again. And for an Aeldari, feeling is power, feeling is beauty, feeling is life. But feeling is also the taste she hungers for. So every ranger, every corsair, every exodite lives one heartbeat away from being noticed by Slaanesh. That's why so many walk in silence. That's why their eyes are distant. That's why their laughter sounds haunted. They are living on the knife edge between life and damnation, freedom and death, silence and song. And yet, there is something pure about them, something almost human. Because they are not bound by fear, not anymore. They have accepted what they are. They know they are ghosts of a dead empire. They know their goddess wants them. They know the galaxy doesn't care if they survive. And still they walk. Still they love. Still they fight. Still they remember the stars as they used to be. Every step they take is defiance. Every breath is rebellion. Every heartbeat is a whisper. You have not taken us yet. Among all the fragments of the Aeldari race, the cold Craftworlds, the cruel Drukhari, the dreaming Harlequins, the Outcasts are the quiet truth. They are the reminder that not all beauty must be perfect, that not all survival must be elegant, that not all endurance must be holy. Some endurance simply is a stubborn candle burning in the dark, a soul walking on because it cannot do anything else. And maybe, in the long, long night between stars, that is the closest thing left to grace. After the fall, after the scream, after the silence, the Aeldari faced a cruel truth. They would have to fight, not for conquest, not for pride, not for empire, for survival. Their craft worlds drifted like exposed nerves through a predatory galaxy. Demons hunted them in the warp. The Drukhari raided them for slaves. Humans, brutal, expanding, unyielding, fired on them out of fear or greed. Orcs attacked them for the joy of it. The Aeldari could not remain only mourners. They would have to become killers again. But there was a problem. War was dangerous, not just physically, spiritually. Their species had already created one god through unchecked emotion. They knew that rage, unleashed without discipline, could build another monster in the warp, or worse, could attract the one already hunting them. So the Craftworlds made a decision that would define the next 10,000 years. If they must become warriors, then war itself must become a path. The path of the warrior was unlike anything that had existed before the fall. It was structure wrapped around fury. It was a cage around the soul. An Aeldari who walked this path did not simply learn to fight. They surrendered to one aspect of war, one mask, one role, one state of being. And they wore it completely. They became it. Every motion, every breath, every heartbeat while on that path was shaped by that one expression of battle. They were not allowed to be many things, only one, perfectly. And when they were done, when their path had been walked to its end, they would set that mask down and step away before it consumed them. That was the theory, that was the hope, and the first to walk that path was a name the Aeldari still speak like a prayer. Asurman. Asurman is called the first Exarch, the first Phoenix Lord, the hand of Asurian, and simply quietly teacher. He was there in the ashes after the fall. He saw the terror in his people's eyes. He saw the helplessness. He saw the rage. Rage is a dangerous thing for an Aeldari. It burns too brightly in the warp. It calls too loudly. But to deny that rage entirely would be suicide, Asurman did not tell his kin, "Do not feel this." He told them, "Feel it like this." That was his genius, not suppression, direction. They gathered in hidden chambers aboard the earliest Craftworlds, not temples of pleasure now, but sanctuaries of purpose. There, Asserman laid down the first doctrine of the aspects. Not armies, aspects, reflections of war, facets of necessary violence, each pure, each contained. He taught them, you will not be a warrior. That is too wide. That is too close to losing yourself. You will be one blade of the whole. You will carry one truth. You will master one moment of battle. You will become that moment. You will live that moment. And then, when you leave the path, you will put that moment down like a weapon placed carefully on an altar. From this teaching were born the aspect shrines. Each shrine represents one vision of war, and each is both temple and school, ritual and armory. The Dire Avengers, Ashurman's own aspect. Disciplined, controlled, relentless, they embody the duty of the Aeldari to defend what remains. They are not berserkers. They are oath-bound guardians, sky-blue and unyielding, the memory of a people standing their ground. The howling banshees, swift, screaming, bladed fury, they channel terror, weaponize it, so that their enemies break before striking. Their wail is psychic and physical both, a keening cry that shreds focus and courage. The striking scorpions, silent hunters beneath shadow, ambushers. They are patience sharpened into lethality, the creeping doom that waits beneath the leaves. The promise that nowhere is truly safe. The fire dragons, the embodiment of annihilation. They are not rage, they are finality. They erase tanks, fortresses, abominations, turning arrogance into molten ruin. The swooping hawks, skyborne precision, eyes of the crafts, the ability to strike where it hurts most, then vanish like a thought. The dark reapers, death from afar, cold and inevitable. They are the stillness before the last heartbeat. They do not celebrate the kill, they witness it. Each of these aspects is not just a style of war. It is a state of mind, a personality you step into, a mask you put on, a mask you promise to remove. But some masks do not come off. Some Aeldari walk a path and never return. They go so deep into the role, so completely into that fragment of war, that they cannot find their way back to what they were before. Those Aeldari become exarchs. To outsiders, an exarch looks like a champion, a leader of a shrine, a master of an aspect. To the Aeldari, an exarch is something more tragic. An exarch is someone who can no longer take off the armor. Not physically, spiritually. They are trapped in the path they chose. That is the price. They have given themselves completely in order to become a pillar for everyone else to lean on. And inside their armor, inside the wraithbone of their suits, their helms, their weapon, something else is happening, something holy, something haunting. Aeldari do not bury their dead and lose them. They take their spirits into stones, waystones, spirit stones, to protect them from Slaanesh. But exarchs, bound to their shrines, bind not only themselves but those who came before them. Their armor is not just armor. It is a reliquary, a vessel, a soul prison and a soul temple both. Every exarch's suit contains the spirits of previous exarchs of that aspect, each one joining, layering, merging, identity upon identity, memory upon memory, blade upon blade. The warrior inside the armor is never alone. They are a chorus. That chorus remembers every battle fought by every soul housed within. They remember the fall. They remember the first screams in the dark. They remember all the wars the Craftworlds have survived. Their will is not one will. It is many. That is why exarchs are terrifying to face in war. You are not facing a single Aeldari. You are facing an unbroken line of them. From among the exarchs, rarer still, there arise figures even more mythic, immortal, unstoppable, names whispered in awe and fear. The Phoenix Lords. The Phoenix Lords are not merely exarchs. They are the first exarchs. They are the sources of the aspects. They are the origin of those shrines. They are the living memories of the first days after the fall. They are the ones who fought when survival felt impossible. They are the first flames that refused to go out. A Surman walks still. His armor has passed from body to body, soul to soul, warrior to warrior, carrying with it all that he was, all that he taught, all that he became. When a Phoenix Lord falls in battle, and yes, they can fall, the armor does not die. It waits, and in time another Aeldari will don it, and when they do, they are no longer themselves alone. They are that lineage, they are that myth, they are that purpose. They rise again, like a bird from fire. Phoenix Lord. Each Phoenix Lord is the perfected expression of their aspect. Asherman, first of the dire avengers, duty, guardianship, oath. Jane Zar, the storm of silence, first of the howling banshees, a living scream of righteous fury. Karandras, the shadow hunter, lord of the striking scorpions, patience sharpened into inevitability. Fugan, the burning lance, wrath forged into focus, the refusal to yield. Baharoth, the cry of the wind, swooping hawk made divine, the sky as weapon. Maugan Ra, the harvester of souls, dark reaper beyond death, living in the border between silence and ending. These are not heroes in the human sense. They are not generals giving speeches. They are living rituals. They are shrines that walk. They are grief given armor. They are rage given discipline. They are proof that Aeldari memory does not have to be passive. It can kill you back. For the Aeldari of the Craftworlds, the Phoenix Lords are more than legends. They are comfort. They are the whisper in the soul that says we are dying. But we are not gone. We still have teeth. When a Phoenix Lord appears on a battlefield, the Craftworld does not cheer with triumph. They exhale in relief. It means that their dead are still standing with them. It means the first generation, the ones who watched the universe break, never truly left. Imagine that. Imagine being hunted by gods, surrounded by nightmares, watching your civilization flicker like a candle in a storm. And then, in your darkest hour, the door opens, and one of your own past lives steps through, carrying 10,000 years of memory, and says without words, "Get up. We are still here. Fight." That is what the Phoenix Lords are, not saviors, reminders. Reminders that the Aeldari refuse to die quietly, but even this miracle carries a shadow. Those who walk the path of the warrior risk never coming back. Some never remove the mask. Some disappear into an aspect and are lost to every other possible self they might have been. Some spend so long inside borrowed rage that they cannot love again without tasting blood. Some stare too long into fate and go blind in the soul. This is the cost. This is the wound that never closes. To survive, they had to make war holy. To survive, they had to make grief a weapon. To survive, they had to build eternal warriors who are not allowed to be anything else. The Phoenix Lords are glory. The Phoenix Lords are tragedy. The Phoenix Lords are what happens when a dying people decides we will not go alone. The Aeldari are a dying people. That is not poetry. That is not melodrama. It is arithmetic. Every Craftworld lost is a bloodline erased. Every soul captured by she who thirsts is gone forever. Every battle they fight, even if they win it, costs too much. They are ancient, but there are very few of them left. The Aeldari live under a question that no other species truly asks. What does survival even mean if you are the last ones and you know you are the last ones? Is survival just delay? Are you only stretching out the moment before extinction? Is every breath just a defiance with no real ending except her? There is only one thing more terrifying than death for the Aeldari: eternity in Slaanesh. So for 10,000 years their existence has been one long retreat. Not from guns, not from planets, but from her. From the god they birthed. From the god that wants to swallow every single Aeldari soul forever. But in the quiet, In secret and whispers, the Craftworld farseers do not all agree should even be spoken. There is another name, another possibility, another god, a god who is not yet fully born, a god not of joy like the Aeldari once chased, not of pleasure, not of art, not of war, not of survival at any cost, a god of endings, a god of stillness, a god of the last quiet breath. They call this god Ynnead, the god of the dead. Ynnead is not like the old gods. In the old days, the Aeldari pantheon was passion given shape, personality, myth layered over reality. Kyla Menchakan, their fury, Isha, their nurture, Asurian, their light, and Slaanesh. Slaanesh is their sin, but Ynnead is something else entirely. Ynnead is a strategy. Ynnead is a weapon. Ynnead is a last move. The Aeldari did not stumble into Ynnead the way they created Slaanesh. Slaanesh was a fever. Ynnead is surgery. Here is how it works. Every craft world protects its dead. We talked about that. Aeldari souls don't go to an afterlife on their own anymore. They can't. Because if they leave the body unguarded, if they drift free in the warp, she takes them, she drinks them, she keeps them forever. There is no mercy in her, there is no release. So the Aeldari use spirit stones. When one of them dies, their soul does not scatter, it is caught, preserved, kept safe. That stone is then taken back, carried home with reverence, and placed inside the Craftworld's psychic core, the Infinity Circuit. Imagine something like a nervous system running through an entire world ship of wraithbone and memory. A glowing network of souls, not ghosts, not echoes, souls trapped, protected. It depends who you ask. To some it is mercy, to others it is a gilded cage, but either way, the souls remain. They are not devoured. They are still Aeldari. They still exist. Over thousands of years, millions of souls have gathered inside those infinity circuits. Not sleeping, not gone. Thinking, layering, blending. Learning from each other. Becoming something more. Each Craftworld soul network is now more than memory. It is an intelligence, ancient, patient, vast. You can speak to it. The spirit seers do. They walk the wraithbone halls and listen to the hum in the walls and ask their ancestors for guidance. And the Craftworld, filled with the souls of its dead, answers. Now imagine all Craftworlds doing this. Now imagine all of those gathered spirits together, not separated, combined. Now imagine that combined mass of Aeldari dead, stopping Slaanesh. Not by fleeing her, by facing her. That is Ynnead. Ynnead, they say, is the god waiting to be born from the totality of Aeldari dead. He is the last defense, the final synthesis, the soul of a murdered civilization risen up in defiance. Slaanesh was born from their excess in life. Ynnead, they whisper, will be born from their discipline in death. She was hunger. He will be release. She is possession. He will be rest. She is endless appetite. He will be the final no. This is their hope. This is their last myth. This is the story they are almost afraid to believe. But this is where hope turns heavy. Because Ynnead is not yet fully awake. He exists, but dimly, incompletely. A ripple in the infinity circuits, a pressure in the wraithbone. A pulse felt by those seers brave enough to listen for it. Some have already risked everything, tried to reach for him in ritual, tried to hasten his rising. Some of those seers never returned from the trance. Some came back changed, gray-eyed, cold-voiced, whispering prophecies of a future where Slaanesh screams. Some came back radiant, carrying something like peace. Some did not come back at all. Their souls never made it to their spirit stones. Slaanesh took them, like a hand slapping down on a candle. The message there is simple. She knows. She can feel him, and she is afraid. Not all Aeldari agree on Ynnead. Among the Craftworlds, some treat this as blasphemy. It is too risky, they warn. Even talking about him draws her attention. Even seeking him is a gamble we cannot afford. And beneath that, another truth. Some fear Ynnead almost as much as they fear Slaanesh. Because what is he really? Is he mercy? Or is he annihilation? Will his awakening free their souls from the hunger of she who thirsts, or consume them in a different kind of ending? Will he save them? Or will he end them? Is there a difference? If the only way to be safe from Slaanesh is for every last Aeldari soul to become part of Ynnead, to surrender all identity, all self, all memory into a single final god, is that salvation? Or is that just a quieter death? These questions are not academic. They keep seers awake for centuries. And yet, there are those who believe, truly believe. There are those who say, we are dying anyway. We are dwindling, Craftworld by Craftworld. Our gods are broken, devoured, shattered. Our warriors are being bled dry. Our children are not enough. Our dead are all we have left in number. Why shouldn't we use them? And behind that desperation there is something else. Something almost like defiance. If Ynnead awakens, if he rises in full, if he becomes the god of Aeldari death, then for the first time since the fall, Slaanesh will not be the only god in the room. They will not die helpless. They will die armed. Their extinction will not be consumption. It will be a strike, a weapon, a final, perfect, sharpened end, a god made not from hunger, but from refusal. There are whispers of those who already walk in his name. The Aeldari. Some say they are heretics. Some say they are visionaries. Some say they are doomed. Some say they are the beginning. They speak openly of Ynnead. They seek to unite Aeldari, Craftworld, Drukhari, Exodite, Corsair, under one cause, one last effort, not to rebuild the empire. That dream is dead. To survive the ending well, to choose their own last chapter. To deny Slaanesh the feast, to awaken the death god completely, to let death at last belong to the Aeldari again. Notice the tone of that. It is not victory, it is dignity. There is a difference. The Aeldari are too old, too wounded, too tired to pretend they will reclaim what they were. They know better. They know that their story is closer to dusk than dawn. But what they refuse, what they absolutely refuse, is to let their story end as cattle. They refuse to be swallowed with no voice, no agency, no last word. Ynnead is the last word, the last voice, the last hand on the throat of a god that has hunted them since the moment she opened her eyes. So now in this age, in the quiet passages of the Webway, in the cold heart chambers of Craftworlds drifting through the dark, in the masked performances of harlequins who claim to remember the whole story of the universe, there is a new prayer. So soft you almost miss it. Not to Asurian, not to Cain, not to Aisha, not even to the laughing god, to the one who is not yet here, to the one who will only exist at the end. It goes like this: when we are gone, let us not be devoured. Let us be a blade. The Aeldari once walked between stars, like you would walk between rooms. No exposure to void, no warp translation, no risk, just a door, just a corridor, just a breath. That was the Webway. It was the quiet miracle of their golden age. It was proof that they had transcended the crude physics other civilizations still bled under. Distance wasn't distance. Time wasn't a cage. The galaxy belonged to them because nothing in it was far. That is not how it is now. Now the Webway is scar tissue. It is cracked, it is bleeding, it is dangerous, and it is full of ghosts. To understand what the Webway is now, you have to understand what the fall did to it. Slaanesh was not born gently. Her scream wasn't just psychic, it wasn't just spiritual, it was structural. Her first breath tore holes in reality, split the galaxy open like a mouth, and let the warp bleed outward. It wasn't only the material universe that cracked. The Webway, that carefully sealed, curated dimension the Aeldari had tended for ages, ruptured. Whole districts collapsed into raw warp. Stable pathways buckled and twisted. Pocket realities went feral. Safe halls became hunting grounds for things that had never existed before that day. There are tunnels where nothing living comes back. There are plazas that echo with voices from 10,000 years ago, replaying the last moments of Aeldari revelry before their souls were torn away. There are sections where gravity forgets to happen, where light moves like liquid, where thought feels heavy. Even the Aeldari fear those places. That alone should tell you enough. And yet, the Webway still exists, broken, leaking, wounded, but alive. It is still the artery of Aeldari survival. They still slip through it when they must. They still hide Craftworld roots there. They still ambush raids, vanish from invasions, strike without warning. The Webway is no longer a garden. It is a knife, and every Aeldari knows how to hold that knife without cutting themselves, or thinks they do. There are regions of the Webway still ruled in their way. We've already walked past one, Kamarug. The Dark City does not float in real space. It is rooted in the torn heart of the Webway itself, a parasite fused into reality's scar tissue. The Drukhari tend their tunnels like spiders. They patch, stitch, force-stabilize sections of corridor for their own use. They redirect predators. They leash demons, bind warp things, and turn threats into weapons. Kamara becomes a hub of poisoned arteries, rewiring that part of the Webway like a tumor rewires blood vessels. That is one way to survive. Control through cruelty. Predation as infrastructure. Then there are the hidden byways of the Harlequins. No one owns those, no one maps those, no one but them even truly understands how they still exist. To talk about the Harlequins, you have to understand the last of the Aeldari gods. Not a dead god, not a devoured god, a trickster, a survivor, a liar, a god who likes stories. They call him the laughing god, Tegorach. Some Aeldari will tell you he is the only one of their old pantheon who escaped Slaanesh. Others say he never intended to be caught in the first place. Others whisper, very carefully, that he betrayed the rest to save himself. No one agrees, but everyone agrees on this. He is still out there, and his servants dance. The Harlequins are not Craftworld. They are not Drukhari. They are not Corsairs or Exodites or Outcasts or Seers. They are apart. To outsiders, they look like performers, killers, jesters in masks and motley. That is not entirely wrong. But it is not a joke. It is liturgy. The Harlequins exist to remember. They are keepers of the whole Aeldari story, from creation to glory to rot to fall to exile to grief to survival. They reenact it in dance and blade. They force their kin to watch. They force their kin to remember. In an age where denial is easy and forgetting is merciful, the Harlequins refuse mercy. They refuse to let the story die, even if the story hurts, especially because it hurts. They stalk the Webway like phantoms. They travel paths no one else can see, leaping between cracks of reality where only lies can balance. They appear without warning on a Craftworld that's about to be invaded, perform a tragedy in the central hall, costumes glittering, masks screaming, blades singing. And then, at the crescendo of the story, they turn and kill. Not their hosts, the invaders. They fight with grace that's almost obscene. They vanish without payment. They leave behind silence. And then, they are gone again, back into the tunnels. The Harlequins do not see the Webway as damaged. To them, it is stage. It is performance space. It is myth-made geography. They walk it like scripture. There are other things in the Webway too. Things even the Harlequins avoid. Warp-spawned predators fused into the half-real corridors by Slaanesh's birth scream. Aeldari experiments that were sealed away before the fall. Sealed behind psychic locks and wraithbone gates. and abandoned when their makers died. Some of those doors are still closed, some are not. There are regions of the Webway flooded with poison light, pale violet storms of psychic radiation that unravel minds and rewrite flesh like it was paint. There are worlds hidden inside the Webway, pocket realities stable enough to settle, home to exile enclaves who refuse Craftworld law, refuse Commorrag's hunger, and trust nothing beyond their own sealed wards. The Aeldari don't talk about them openly. Why would they? They've learned what happens when the rest of the galaxy finds what they love. It burns, or it is stolen, or it is corrupted, or it is eaten. To humans, the Webway is myth. To most of the Imperium, it's a rumor that borders on heresy. There are doors in reality that the Xenos use. There are secret roads that bypass the warp. There are paths only they can walk. The Imperium suspects. It has tried to force entry. It has tried to replicate. It has tried more than once to break in and use those arteries for itself. Sometimes they get inside, briefly, and then the Webway kills them. Gently, even. No spectacle. Just a sudden, soundless fold in geometry, a vanishing of ship or strike team, a soft moment where coordinates become meaningless. You cannot navigate what does not want you. And the Webway does not want humanity. Not yet, not fully, not unless someone else opens the door. For the Aeldari in this late age, the Webway is both curse and lifeline. Curse because it is no longer safe. Any passage could be a dead end. Any corridor could bleed open into the warp. Any sealed arch could hide a Drukhari raiding party, or worse, something older, something nameless, something hungry and silent. Lifeline because without it they would be gone already. It is how Craftworlds avoid human blockades. It is how they strike, then vanish without trail. It is how the Drukhari harvest pain and pull it home like contraband. It is how the Harlequins move from doomed world to doomed world like messengers of both warning and theater. It is how the scattered, dying fragments of this once supreme species remain connected at all. There is a bitter poetry in that. The same system that once fed their arrogance now barely sustains their survival. The same private road they used to glide through the galaxy in perfection is now a bleeding wound they hide inside. The Webway used to be proof they were untouchable. Now it is proof they are hunted. And still they walk it, because that is what the Aeldari do. They walk on broken things. They take shattered structures, shattered gods, shattered selves, and keep using them, long after any human would have called it hopeless. They whisper to Wraithbone that screams. They seal doors that leak reality. They map tunnels that shift when you are not looking at them. They remember routes across a maze that should not exist. They teach those routes to their children. They pass them down like lullabies. It is dangerous, they say. It is dying, they say. It will one day collapse entirely, they say. And then softly, but for now, it still holds. Sometimes in the oldest reaches where no Craftworld walks, where no Drukhari hunts, where even the Harlequins only pass in silence, you can still find traces of what the Webway used to be. Halls of pale, perfect light, floors that hum faintly with remembered song, archways engraved with joy in a language no human has ever heard aloud. You can stand in those halls if you are quiet and unarmed and feel it. The echo, the afterimage of pride, the arrogance, the grace, the certainty that once, long ago, the Aeldari thought this was forever. And you can feel, layered over that memory, the grief of what followed. That is why some of them still walk these tunnels. Not just to survive, to mourn, to keep touching the past with their own hands, to say, we were here. We existed. We moved like light. And the Webway, in its broken whisper, answers them. The Aeldari were never meant to die. That was their first mistake. They were made to last forever. Their bodies enduring, their minds unaging, their souls luminous, their civilization self-sustaining. They were the galaxy's perfection. The example every younger race would one day crawl toward and never reach. But perfection is a trap. Once you reach it, there's nowhere left to go. And when a perfect thing cracks, it does not simply break, it shatters. Now 10,000 years after their fall, the Aeldari live as fragments of memory trying to be people again. Their empire is gone. Their gods are dead. Their homeworlds are dust and echoes. But they still walk across a galaxy that barely remembers their name, across the edges of human maps, across the corridors of their own half-living ships, across the shadows of their mistakes. They are not gone. They are simply quieter. The galaxy calls them dying. They call themselves awake. Because if you have lived through the death of your gods, through the burning of your heaven, through the silence of your people, and you are still breathing, then maybe you understand life better than anyone. The Craftworlds still drift. Each one a world-sized reliquary, a tomb that dreams of dawn. Their gardens hum with ghosts. Their warriors walk in ritual. Their children learn to balance wonder and fear before they even learn to speak. Their seers listen to the future like it's a wound. They do not seek victory, they seek another day. The Aeldari have learned that sometimes survival is enough. Sometimes survival is triumph. The Drukhari still dance in the dark city. They still kill. They still feed. They still pretend the fall never happened. But even among them, in quiet, drunken corners, in fleeting moments between screams, there are eyes that look upward and remember. Remember sunlight, remember art, remember love that wasn't a weapon. And for a heartbeat, they are Aeldari again. Then the hunger returns, and they laugh, because that's all that's left. The Exodites still tend their wild worlds. They till alien soil with hands that once shaped stars. They raise families in the shadow of beasts that could crush their settlements in a breath. And every night, as they light their fires beneath alien moons, they whisper prayers to ancestors whose names they no longer know. Their gods are dead, but their gratitude is not. And somehow, on those quiet worlds, the Aeldari are still what they once wanted to be. Free. The Harlequins still dance in the Webway. They are the storytellers now, the keepers of truth. They remember everything, even what others wish to forget. They perform the rise and the fall, the birth of Slaanesh, the birth of Ynnead, the betrayal, the survival. Their masks are smiles, but their eyes are tears. Their laughter echoes down the empty tunnels, turning history into myth and myth into warning. And when they finish the tale, they bow to the empty air. Because somewhere in the darkness between realities, Segharach is still laughing. And Slaanesh, she is still watching, still waiting, still hungry. The thirst never fades. Every Aeldari soul that slips, every one that dies unguarded, every one that falters in discipline is another note in her endless feast. But she no longer laughs quite as loud as she once did, because now she knows something. The Aeldari are not finished, not yet. In the psychic currents of the infinity circuits, something stirs. The souls of the dead hum in harmony. The wraithbone glows warmer. The dreams of the living carry new symbols. The name Ynnead passes between seers like a secret flame. He is not awake, not yet. But he listens. Every spirit stone placed into the circuit brings him closer. Every death of an Aeldari who dies with purpose strengthens him. Every act of defiance against Slaanesh is a prayer. And when enough of them have fallen, when the last of their kind finally joins the chorus, he will rise, and his first act will not be vengeance. It will be silence, perfect, peaceful silence. The kind the Aeldari have been chasing for 10,000 years. The kind that cannot be eaten. The kind that even gods will learn to fear. Until then, they endure. They fight battles they know they cannot win. They make art for a galaxy that does not understand it. They love knowing love itself endangers them. They carry grief like oxygen. And through it all, they walk with elegance. Always elegant, always tragic, always themselves. Because that is what the Aeldari are now. Not a people of conquest, a people of grace under doom. A people who looked into their own apocalypse and learned how to breathe inside it. There is a saying whispered among their seers, translated roughly into human words. We are echoes of eternity. We sing the song that ended once, so it will never end again. That is what they are. Echoes. Not the full melody, not the chorus, just fragments. But fragments that still resonate. Fragments that still remember. Fragments that still hum with impossible beauty. And sometimes when the galaxy is quiet, if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear it. A single note of the Aeldari song floating across the dark. Soft, distant, unbroken. That is the Aeldari. The architects of their own extinction. The survivors of their own perfection. The ghosts who refuse to die. The dancers on the edge of eternity. The last dream of a species that once thought it could outlive death itself. And maybe in a way they will. Because even when the last Craftworld fades and the last spirit stone grows dim and the last harlequin finishes the last dance, the story will remain. Told by someone else, remembered by something else, carried onward like starlight, traveling through time long after the star is gone. That is eternity. That is the Aeldari. And so, the echoes fade. The lights of the Craftworlds drift on, dim but unbroken, carrying the last voices of a people who once ruled the stars and now survive only through memory, discipline, and will. The Aeldari are not gone. Not yet. They endure, half shadow, half dream. A whisper carried through the cold between galaxies. If you've made it this far, close your eyes. Listen to the silence they left behind. It's not emptiness. It's a promise. A promise that even when everything falls, something still remains. Thank you for joining me on this journey, through the long and tragic history of the Aeldari. Every story in Warhammer 40,000 is a fragment of this endless struggle, a spark of light in the darkness. Now I'd love to know, which story should we explore next? The rise of the Primarchs, the hidden gods of chaos, the birth of the Imperium? Let me know in the comments below. Your ideas shape what comes next. If you enjoyed this story and want to keep wandering the stars with me, remember to subscribe, leave a like, and help others find their way to sleep among the ruins of eternity. Until next time, rest well, traveler, and may your dreams be free from the gaze of she who thirsts.